This video will demonstrate how to practice value with more experimental techniques. I have several supplies that I used for this experiment in hand value. As you can see, rather than drawing on traditional material like paper, I decided to use a ripped piece of cardboard. I also gathered watercolor paints, a cup of water, paper towel, an eraser, and both black and white charcoal while I was working on this. Once the hand was drawn onto cardboard, I was able to use the watercolor paint to add value. Before I could use the watercolors, I had to activate the paint. Do this by picking up some water from the cup with one of the larger brushes and dripping the water into the paint tray in the color you want to activate. I decided to use brown as it would complement the color of the cardboard. I mixed yellow into some of the brown in the lid of the watercolor tray and brown with purple in another part of the tray. If you would feel more comfortable watching some videos on how to use watercolor before attempting this, there are some watercolor technique videos in the 2D video tutorial link in Canvas under the watercolor section on page 4. As I started to add washes of watercolor to what I drew, I did this in light layers while I was looking at the image I used to draw. While it's best to draw from life, using a photograph works when you don't have a model to observe while you work. I used a photograph because I was alone in my studio when I did this. There is an image of what I was attempting to represent on the left. The nice thing about watercolor is that if the colors are diluted enough, building up the values is gradual, allowing you to control the paint easier than oil or acrylic. As you apply more and more paint to the surface of the paper, the object you are painting will appear to take form. In this case, you can start to see the different parts of the hand. I hope you can tell the water reacted in different ways across the cardboard. In some areas it settled in a bend that was in the cardboard, and in others the watercolor pooled where the paper sagged when it got wet. I also sometimes used the paper towel in order to remove parts of the paint or help the paint dry. In order to create washes of watercolor, the paint has to be pretty diluted so the pigment or color of the paint doesn't immediately absorb into the paper in which you are working. This means adding more water to the pigment and working quickly to add more water to areas of the paper, in this case cardboard, where the color needs to be diluted even more. While it is necessary to work quickly, you can also have a piece of paper towel near you to help soak it up if the paint is too strong as you work. This works with most paper, but should be tested anytime you paint on a new surface. One other thing I want to mention is that you could use ink or gouache in the same way as well. I had watercolor available, so I used that instead. I took a break for a little while to get something to eat, and when I came back, I noticed that the watercolor wasn't dark enough on the cardboard to really have good enough contrast to show the value of the hand. Therefore, I used more watercolor to add more layers of the brown value to the hand. I also put washes into the ripped areas to tie the color palette into that area of the drawing. Even though this is not a finished piece, it's good to practice unifying the mark making every time you draw. When I felt like there was enough value in watercolor, I switched to the charcoal and added some black to areas behind the hand. I allowed the side of the charcoal to drag across the surface, picking up the texture of the cardboard as I drew. Once I applied enough watercolor washes to the hand, I let that dry. I then started adding more charcoal with both white and black so that I had some really dark areas behind the hand and some really strong highlights in the hand. Notice that I was careful which finger I used to blend either black or white to make sure I didn't muddy the values I was creating. I often use my pinky finger to blend white, while the others can be used to blend black. If you use a specific finger for a specific color, it helps to keep the value blending separated as you work. I also turned the cardboard around so my hand didn't drag across the image as I was attempting to draw. I assessed where I needed to change the values to make the hand show up, not only from the background, but also so the fingers showed up against the palm. After I added the highlights to make the fingers appear above the palm, I then added black parts to set the palm back in space. One of the final things I did was to take the corner of the charcoal to address the edges of the fingers and delineate the fingernails. I did have to go back and erase to make those edges crisp in order to define the intricacies of the fingers and fingernails. While I used a larger eraser in some parts of the palm or fingers to create value transitions, I also used the sharp edges of a pencil eraser to make sure the fingertips appeared more focused. While it might seem that using cardboard might be a little frustrating, I'm glad that I practiced on this because it gave me a unique texture in some areas, and I learned how to control the pastels more by breaking it to create a sharp corner to get finer value and linear development in the fingertips specifically. Rather than being afraid of trying something new, I boldly tried a new material and gained more skills as an artist because of it. This is one way of working experimentally and with multiple media. While I tried to unify the work for the most part, I probably should have added white to the background as well. Not as bright as in the hand, but a little texturally to unify the drawing. To be honest, it's why I assign things like this, because it exposes you to new materials and techniques that help you grow as an artist. I encourage you to continue trying new things and share them with other artists, as that is how we all learn.